My name is Gloria Steinem. This is the first time that I've been in San Miguel at all. I've always heard about this magical place, and writers' conferences, of course, have an added appeal because we all come here thinking it's going to help us write, right? And since we're all obsessed, this is a great appeal. And it's very helpful, I think, as it always is, to talk to other people who are absorbed in a parallel process and to have a community. You know, we are all communal animals. We can't do it by ourselves. And since being a writer is in and of itself solitary, we especially need big doses of community where we can discuss everything, our work habits. You know, we always
Sure.
think, you know, and you can find actually help with your work habits. So this kind of community, both because of the physical place, which is incredibly beautiful and full of history and full of creativity, and because of the people who are drawn here, is really a place I've always wanted to come.
So even for you, as a well-known writer and a successful writer, you still need that sense of community, if you will, right? And kind of learning from each other, being in a community of writers.
You know, however much you write, the fact is when you're faced with a blank page or a blank screen, it's the same. So we all, I think, need this in different ways. Probably the danger of being a new writer is that you think there's one way. Mm-hmm. And if you just learn it, everything will be fine, which is not true.
But so here you are, you're doing this writing and blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden you're leading a movement that would have worldwide implications. Can you identify a period in there when something started to shift for you? And you said, I guess I'm a little bit more than just a journalist.
I would have stayed a solitary journalist and writer. I had devoted a substantial portion of my life until my mid-30s to never speaking in public, which it was just too nerve-wracking. I was an observer. I think the impulse to be an observer is part of what makes a journalist. What happened was that I became unable to write what I cared about, because the women's movement came along, and to some extent the anti-Vietnam War movement and movements in general, but especially the women's movement. It just was impossible to get the editors I'd been working with to take it seriously, to entertain proposals, much less articles. And therefore, I went out to speak because I was desperate. It was so exciting and so important, and there was just no other way to get the word out. It was just an aha. It wasn't that only I could do it. No, it was just that nobody else was doing it. You know, and we just started to go to campuses or places that invited us because they were curious about this new thing called feminism or women's liberation. And in that way, I discovered you don't die, actually, from public speaking. You think you will die, but you don't. And I also discovered that something happens in a room that cannot happen on the page. So if we're really going to not just know, but understand, it's helpful. You know, we can learn stories, we can identify, we can do all kinds of things on the page or the screen, but we don't have that extra boost of empathy. And I discovered that in rooms, you know, that people, it's like a kind of magical communication.
Yeah.
So, you know, you'd be in a place with 5,000 people in the audience, and if you make a place for it to happen, then you can pretend you're sitting in a circle. You have to really listen to each other. And I try to, in the beginning, say, you know, pretend you're not all looking at each other's backs and, you know, this is hierarchical setting, forget about that, pretend we're in a circle. And if you have enough time, somebody over here will ask a question and somebody over there will answer it. And people will say things they wouldn't say to their closest friends and relatives because it makes a force field in the room. it's a magic event. So I just began to realize that writing was not the only way, and not necessarily always the best way. Mm-hmm. That it's not about making a hierarchy of ways to communicate. It's just that we need to use them all.
Mm-hmm. When you look back at your early life, were there mentors along the way that kind of gave you a sense of yourself, that maybe you could do some things you hadn't thought you were able to do?
Well, my mentors were in books. You know, I read everything that Louisa May Alcott wrote, including all her adult novels too. I used to sit and fantasize as a child about, suppose she would come back to life. What would I show her first? You know, what would she like to see? I mean, I was obsessed with Louisa May Alcott. Also Nancy Drew, I have to say, the series of books, Nancy Drew, because she was riding around in her roadster solving crimes. Then the teenage years came upon me, which what happens to girls especially, although boys too, happens earlier actually for boys. But the idea of the feminine role, which comes down on you like the Iron Maiden.
Your mother was a journalist, right?
Yes, she was.
And yet, was your grandmother was a suffragette or marked? Did you think any of that kind of was in the back of your mind at all? That didn't.
I didn't know it. Mm. I didn't know that my grandmother, who died when I was 5 or 6, was a suffragist and had traveled and addressed Congress. And I mean, I didn't know it. People brag about what they think in the family is worthwhile. So they would tell me she had 4 sons, she kept a kosher table, she, you know, right? Not that she was the first female elected to the school board in Toledo and ran on a ticket with the anarchists. They didn't tell me that part, right? So it took me a while to discover that. Also, my mother had, I'm sorry to say, felt she had to give up everything she loved, which was her career in journalism, her friends, and so on, quite a while before I was born. So I didn't know that. I only discovered that later.
Yeah. You almost wonder if there's a genetic thing, something that just gets passed down.
Well, my mother did always, she loved books. She taught me how to open a book and run your finger down the spine so you don't break the spine. She taught me how to take a piece of typing paper and fold it into thirds, which is what reporters did then because there were no reporters' notebooks, and hold it in your hand so you could take. So, you know, she knew lots of poetry by heart, and I still know it because I would hear her recite it. But what's sad to me is that she couldn't become herself, you know, really, and do what she loved.
So, if you look back at your career, which is, you know, spanned, you know, what would you say, 50 years of this unbelievable journey you've had, I'd like to talk for just a moment about the highs and lows, and let's start with the lows. I mean, describe some time where you were thinking, God, am I doing the right thing? Why am I doing, throw in the towel, I can't take the abuse anymore. What comes to mind when you think of it?
Well, you can't throw in the towel because the towel is you, you know, and you can't stop thinking about, you know, just the situations that present. So I never thought about throwing in the towel exactly, but I certainly, I'll tell you that the worst punishment, I think, that I can think of is being misunderstood. And that happens along the way, you know, that when the magazine first started, for instance, there was, you know, a certain, oh, well, she's just doing this, or we collectively are just doing this for ourselves, we're taking advantage, we're going to make money off the movement. I mean, as if little magazines made money, they don't. But still, there was that makes you feel bad. There was the idea that the movement is white and middle class, which has never been true, which makes you feel bad, you know.
So it's again that thing about not being understood and what your goals are.
And it happened again in 2008 because there was Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, and people would say to me, are you supporting Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama? And I would say yes, you know, because, but they were so much the same on the issues And when I finally had to decide, I decided Hillary Clinton on the basis of her experience with the ultra-right wing, which Obama did not have. And I supported her. And then people accused me of saying that sex was more important somehow than race. When in fact, for 40 years, I'd been trying to say they're intertwined. You can't uproot one without uprooting both. And that was extremely painful, extremely painful.
All right, let's look at the sunny side then. Think of a time, or what comes to mind when you think about, well, boy, this is great. I feel satisfied. We're really moving in the right direction.
Well, there are moments, and they're mostly small moments, I would say. Somebody comes up to me in the street, and it's a great gift to be recognizable as part of something that I deeply care about. I'd be crazy to think it was about me. I know it's about the movement, But I get the stories sometimes, they come and tell me these amazing stories. Well, here's what happened in my life because of something they associate with me or the magazine or just because of the idea in general. And I am the recipient of those stories, and that's enough. Any one of them is enough to keep you going for a month.
Is there one that kind of stands above the others that comes to mind quickly?
Well, there's one. There's so many but there's one that I think of especially because I was in a book autograph line, for a book of mine in a bookstore, and a woman, very elegant woman in a red suit, black woman, in I don't know, middle age, sort of 30s, 40s. While I'm signing, she's telling me the story about how when she first read Ms. Magazine, she was in jail, in prison, for prostitution. And after she read the magazine, she wondered how come she was in jail and not the customer. So she asked for law books and was told that in that state only men's prisons had a law library, not women's prisons. So she organized the women prisoners to get law books. And she started to help them with their child custody cases, everything that happens when you're in prison. You lose your kids. And then she went to apprentice herself to a women's law firm after she got out. And she said, and now I'm a lawyer. She said, I thought you just might like to know. I mean, that keeps you going right there for at least a month, if not longer. And there are just tons of them, tons of them.
If you think, going back a minute, about your grandmother, and sort of imagine there's another chair here, and your grandmother sort of appears, and she's looking at what you've done, what do you think she'd say? What would be her reaction to your life and work?
I'm not sure, because my grandmother was a traditional woman inside the home. She cooked, she had 4 sons, she did all of that. And then also she was outside being a suffragist, founding a vocational high school, so I'm not sure exactly, but I hope she would be happy, and I certainly would be happy to be able to thank her, which I never could.
As I look at your work, one of the things that strikes me is that you've had to be sort of improvisational. And I see you not as a classical musician, but as a jazz player.
That's true, right.
So how do you see kind of you having to be light on your feet or being a little bit more like a jazz player?
Movements are like that. I'm not sure that need has diminished. It's true now that there are many, many more movement jobs. That is, you can be part of the movement you love and care about and make a living, which was almost impossible in those days, except for Ms. Magazine and a few people in the National Organization for Women, but very few. So you can work for a nonprofit that is doing what you care about, and that's a big difference. But I would say that the improvisational quality is crucial. No single situation is identical with any other. And the idea that there are cut and dried solutions that come from the top is just not true, most 90% of the time. The people who have experienced something are the experts in it. So the first thing you have to do is listen and hear what is true, about this particular situation. And I love that. For instance, in the magazine world, our version of it is the editorial meeting. Life to me is one big editorial meeting. You're sitting around the table, you're trying to think of ideas, think of ways to phrase it so everybody can understand it, think of who should write it, and a movement is kind of like that. Okay, we need that senator, who is trusted by that senator that we can get to go and talk to them. It's all about improvising, and it's exciting. In movements, you might say we're entrepreneurs of social change. I think people understand entrepreneur better in a way, and that, when you start a business, you have to be, but it's not different in a movement.
So even going along over time, you still have to keep that
Yes,
entrepreneurial spirit, that
absolutely.
improvisational.
And the minute you try to apply like a cookie cutter, one solution to another solution, it's a problem. And you have to listen. Do we have time for a story? Can I tell you a story?
It's your time.
Okay.
So we got time.
This is, a kind of more recent and definitive story for me. I had just gone in Zambia to a big conference about sex trafficking. I was going to visit friends who live along the Zambezi River. They had arranged for me to meet with village women, about 30 or 40 village women, sitting on the ground in a field. Right. I thought, okay, this time it may not work, this circle thing, because we're just too different. But it did, of course, because finally, after a couple of rounds, one of the women started talking about how her husband beat her, which she wasn't supposed to say, and then everybody else started to tell the truth. So a couple of them had gone to Lusaka, ended up being sex trafficked and never came home. So I said, well, what can we do about that? And they said, well, if we could grow enough maize to have a cash crop, we would have food security and we could pay our kids' school fees and we wouldn't have to do that. I said, well, okay, how could you grow enough maize? They said, well, if we had an electrified fence around a lot of acres, because otherwise the elephants come in as soon as the maize comes and eat it. And right. Traditionally, they had another way of dealing with that with drums, but that was gone. Okay, so I said, well, so I raised money for an electrified fence. It wasn't that much, a few $1,000s. The fence got built. I went back the next year. They had a bumper crop of maize, enough to sell, to have their kids' school fees besides their own food. They were singing songs to the maize. They're, dancing under the trees to the maize. We're celebrating the maize. If you had asked me, what is a cure for sex trafficking, I never would have said an electrified fence. Okay. So this is why we need to listen and figure out. And I'm sorry to say, this is what some of the Bill Gates kind of foundations are worst at. Because they get an idea of what the solution is up there, and they impose it with sometimes very, very negative circumstances, like increasing sex trafficking by 300% in India, because they were distributing condoms to the, and a lot of money to the traffickers with no proof that women have the power to make men use condoms anyway, and the money was being used to buy more women and children. So, you have to listen.
You even started the session this morning with that, about going into a new situation and let the people who are there, they're the experts, let them tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
I must say that in retrospect, it took me a long time to realize it, but I lived in India when I first got out of college. And I spent a few weeks walking through villages with a Gandhian team that were trying to stop a riot that was going on then. And they used to just say that to me, but I didn't understand it was applicable in this country for many years. They used to just say to me, okay, if you want people to listen to you, you have to listen to them. If you want to change how they live, you have to go where they live. If you, and it's true everywhere.
Yeah. What do you want your legacy to be?
I have no idea. I mean, when I was interviewing people, I used to ask this unanswerable question, which now, see, punishment it's asked, of how would you want to be remembered? And it's a very hard, I mean, I think I would just want to be remembered as somebody who had a good heart and some mind anyway, and tried to make the world a little better and more fair and kind than it was when I got here. And if the fact that I tried to do this and succeeded to some extent helps other people to try to do it, I'll be very happy. I don't think I can say how, because only they know.
It's kind of opening doors for the next generation. So heart, head, make a difference would be the kind of the three.
And speak your authentic voice. You know, each one of us is unique. We are some combination of heredity and environment that could never have happened before and could never happen again. That's one thing. The other thing is we're part of the human community. So it's not either or, it's those two things together.
So the young college freshman girl is just coming into all of this stuff and wants to move forward in this. What would be a couple of pieces of advice you'd have?
What do you see that's unfair? Or you're sitting in a classroom, are the men getting called on more than the women? What does it say in the textbook? Does the history of this country start with Columbus? It didn't. Start when people started. Whole revolution right there. You know, to just realize that she or a young man is unique, and no one knows what she or he knows, and no one can do what they are. And a good key to it is, what do you forget what time it is when you're doing? You love it so much. You would do it even if you didn't get paid, though I want them to get paid. There's that, and then there's the fact that you need a community. You cannot do it by yourself. I guess I would just say, just always remember that the thing about life is it's a circle, not a pyramid. And the shortest way I've invented to say this, and I put it on a bracelet so it had to be short, because they were asking me what to put on a bracelet, that we are linked, not ranked.
Knowing that you're at the Writers' Conference and that you've done so successful with your writing, and that there's this people out there who aren't writers but will see this perhaps, is there anything that about what we've been talking about here, which is really your personal journey, is there something you'd like to say that we haven't touched on?
What do you personally feel an urgency about? What really, when you're doing it or saying it or writing it, do you forget what time it is? You know, I mean, there are a lot of things I do and I care about deeply, but only when I'm writing do I think that I shouldn't be doing something else.
Thank you. Now, I don't know if I told you guys, but when I was watching her HBO special, Barbara Walters is interviewing her, and the issue of tap dancing comes up, and she does a little tap dance for Barbara Walters. But Barbara Walters didn't want to sing. And I'm happy to sing.
But she did. Eventually, we did a little benefit, part of a big benefit in Carnegie Hall.
Really?
And she did.
Don't take my sunshine away. I was Miss Dada, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. Woo!